Hey everybody, Paradox 2767 here, and as you can see, we're about to talk Dungeons and Dragons once again. We had another session last night, me and a couple of friends of mine, and we started exploring our first dungeon. If you remember what happened last time, we took down the tavern of a local gambling ring, and we were able to fool the owner of that tavern into thinking that it wasn't us responsible, but a member of a local cult. And then we decided it was high time we went and got to the bottom of that cult activity, and luckily for us, not too far away, was one of their sort of centers of operation, an old temple. So we went and checked out that temple, and we had on our hands a dungeon. I started wondering a good way to randomly generate new rooms within dungeons, because that was coming up a lot yesterday, and I thought I'd devise a decent plan for doing so. So this is for new DMs. It's just a method you can try out yourself and tweak to figure out what happens in the next room when you're going through a dungeon. I call it my 1d4 new room contents decider. I gotta check this out with my DM. We haven't even tested this yet. So basically we're gonna roll a 1d4 for 4 different things. For monsters, loot, doors, and your goal. And I'll explain that as we go. So first we wanna see how many monsters are in this new room. That means every time you enter a new room, there's gonna be monsters in it. Now you could decide that a 1 means 0 monsters or something like that. But for our purposes, let's just see what would happen. So we're gonna roll a 1d4. Alright, so I rolled a 4. That means there's going to be 4 monsters in the room you just entered. So you can imagine that you're in a temple and all of a sudden you're totally overwhelmed by a giant group of fiends. Now it's time to determine its type, and that we're going to use our challenge rating to figure out. So you're going to want your DM to get out your monsters manual and pop it open to check out what kind of monsters might populate. The big deal here is to look at the challenge rating. So this guy, a spectator, he has a challenge rating of 3. So if we had 4 of those in a room, we'd be looking at a combined challenge rating of about 12. Now, me and my crew, we're level 1 right now. I think that might be a little overwhelming. Maybe if your group members are at a level 12 already, or something close to it, your DM would be able to throw a group of spectators at you. For our purposes, that's way too high. So basically, we're just gonna keep flipping through the page randomly and finding perfect, the appropriate challenge rating. So here you go. Bullywug. See how easy that was? It turns out there's 4 bullywugs in our room. It's going to be a group of little frog dudes with some spears. If your DM is familiar with them, he probably already knows a lot of this information. Otherwise, he can just sort of make it up as he goes. So let's just say you enter a room, there's 4 bullywugs, all spear brandishing and ready to take you down. Because the challenge rating is 1/4, that means it's a total challenge rating, sort of 1. And since we're all level 1, that'll work perfect. Next, let's determine if there's some loot in this room. Okay, so we'll roll another d4. The way I've got this device is if you roll a 4, it means yes, there's loot. Technically, the rules of Dungeons and Dragons state that for every encounter you have, you're going to get a little loot. I believe that's how that works. But when we were playing yesterday, it was kind of determined by the DM whether or not there was loot in a room or not. And this is just a way to do that. So we'll roll for that. And we've got a 4. Great. So there is going to be loot here. Now it's time to determine the type of loot. So we'll go to page 136 of the D&D Master's Guide. This is a section of the book that helps you determine random treasure. Seeing as how you're probably new to D&D, I thought it'd be easier to just use these lists on page 136 to quickly decide what kind of treasure might be in the room. So if you wanted to do individual treasure here, the challenge of 0 to 4 is appropriate here because we have a cumulative challenge of 1 with those 4 bullywugs. So we'll be able to roll for this section because the challenge wasn't too overwhelming. And it looks like we're going to want to do a D100 to determine what kind of treasure is within the room. Okay, got my D100, so we'll roll and see what kind of treasure we're dealing with. We've got an 81, so let's pop back over to our treasure sheet, and with an 81, it turns out that we've got 3d6 gold pieces. I believe that 10 is just to give you an average of what you might roll, but we're just going to go ahead and roll those 3d6 and see what kind of gold pieces we're working with. So, roll these. Whoop. And we've got 5, 4, and a 6, so 15 gold pieces within the room. So between these 4 bullywugs, either on their person or in some sort of chest within the room, we have 15 gold pieces. So let's start writing this down. 4 bullywugs to deal with, 15 gold pieces at stake here. Next, we want to figure out how many doors are in the room. So we're going to roll another 1d4, and we're going to get the number of doors. And this includes the door you came into. So we'll roll a 1d4, and we get a 4. Holy smokes, we're rolling a lot of 4s. So there's 4 doors. And lastly, let's roll for goal. Now, when we were in our dungeon yesterday, we were chasing after kind of a wizard monk who we were gonna peg the crime of taking down the bar on. So we were chasing him down and we were gonna take him back to the bar owner and say, hey, look, we caught somebody, even though it was actually me and King Elsa did today that took down the pillar, like I mentioned in my last video. So we'll roll and see whether or not our goal is in the room, and we get a 3. Okay, so the way I have this devised, just like loot, you know, if you get a 4, there is loot. If you get a 4, your goal is also in the room. But since we rolled a 3, that's not the case. So there's no goal. So to paint the picture, we come to a room with 4 bullywugs. There's 15 gold pieces to be gained in that room. There's 4 doors total, and there's no goal. So our monk that we're chasing is not in the room. First off, we're going to have to take on those enemies. We can get some loot from that. Then we're going to have to decide which door to follow the monk through. Now, we came through one of those doors, so that means we're going to have to use intuition and see if we can decide what door is the correct one. Maybe we'll do that wrong and we'll go through the wrong door. We'll be on a wild goose chase through a giant temple and have no way of finding that monk. Now, one possible room is one that has 1 door and your goal in it. Well, that would be great because that means you followed the monk or whoever you're chasing all the way down to the end of the trail and you find them at the room that you thought they'd be in and you've successfully chased them down. But another possibility is having 1 door and the goal isn't in there. And if you've been running intuition checks and so far you've done everything correctly and you should be on the monk's trail, well, that simply means there must be another entrance or exit in that room. That happened to us yesterday. There was a statue we had to manipulate to find a hidden room. So if you're a DM, you can just make that up on the fly and say, oh, there's a rug on the floor and there's a painting on the wall, and with some intuition checks, maybe there's a hole behind the painting or trapdoor underneath the rug. Now, one other possibility is you rolled a couple intuition checks incorrectly, and so you've been thrown off the scent of your monk, unbeknownst to your characters. Well, if that's the case, your DM can probably stop rolling for this extra goal area, because that means you guys are very unlikely to find that monk in the twisting halls of the catacombs, and so you don't really have any chance of finding him in the next room ahead. Unless he happens to double back, perhaps. What if you rolled a 1d8 and you had to get an 8 for him to be in the next room? Or a 1d12 and you had to roll a 12 for him to be in the next room? The odds of you finding him in that next area would have shrunk, but that's one way you can handle something like that. So there you go. That's one method for populating a dungeon with a 1d4. If you're new to the game like us, I hope you try that out and see about how you should tweak that and figure out how you can better get those rooms populated. Until then, I hope you're having as much fun as us trying out Dungeons & Dragons for the first time. We will see you in the next video, and thank you so much for watching.